Welcome to this special 5-part series where we dive into learning about ADHD. I'm joined by 5 successful female leaders who all have diagnosed ADHD. I'm deeply curious to understand their stories and to learn both how they've learned to thrive in a neurotypical world and how, as leaders, we can keep building cultures where everyone belongs and everyone reaches their highest potential. Today, I'm super thrilled to be joined by Rose Callaghan. Welcome, Rose.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Thanks for joining me. Let me share, in case people haven't come across you before, let me just briefly share your bio and then we'll get going with our conversation. So Rose is a professional award-winning stand-up comedian with her finger in lots of pies. She's an ADHD advocate and public speaker and has been talking about ADHD publicly since her first solo comedy show 8 years ago, which I just love, was titled Attention Deficit, oh, a pony, and then got bored and changed the title for the next festival.
Yep.
Now Rose does more serious keynote speeches and talks, and still works in the corporate world doing content marketing and copywriting. I know Rose is passionate about increasing education of ADHD in the workplace, and that's the next public speaking topic that you're working on.
That is correct.
Rose, brilliant. Can I ask you to share with the audience, who are you as a human being? How do you answer that question?
Wow, we're getting real deep straight away. Who
We
am
are.
I? I'm an ENFP on the Myers-Briggs personality test. If anyone's into that, it's kind of like horoscopes these days. I don't know if people take. Remember when personality tests were a big thing? Who am I as a
Yes.
person? I'm very creative. I'm passionate. I believe in equality and justice. Yeah, I think I'm pretty fun and I try to be kind and empathetic.
Oh, I love that. Beautiful. So, well, let's just get into your story then. And, I think the thing that for this series, we're exploring ADHD in particular. And I know, having, seen some of your background material, that you had what you described yourself as a light bulb moment watching Hannah Gadsby talk about her own diagnosis, I think it was. Can you take us through that period of time? What was going on for you?
Oh, well, I started doing stand up like 2 weeks after I turned 30, which I think it's like, were you going through a weird period in your life, maybe? Yeah, so I ended up getting diagnosed when I was 32. But it had been in my mind for a long time and maybe 10 years. And I'd sort of tried to look into it. I spoke to my psychologist about it and she was like, oh, because my friend had actually said it to me when
Right.
I was about 22. Um, and yeah, I spoke to my psych about it. She's like, oh, I don't know much about ADHD in adults. She's like, I do have this like children's psychology textbook. We can go through the criteria there. And I was like, yep, we answered the questions. And she's like, well, I guess you fit the criteria for like kids ADHD. I was like, all right, cool. And I tried to look into it. I was just so confused about what the process was to get diagnosed. I was like, psychiatrist. And yeah, so I gave up. And I was dating a guy for a bit who had ADHD. And I was like, oh, and yeah, at some point around that time, I'd gone to see Hannah Gadsby was doing a spot at Kaz Rytop's Dirty Secrets in Collingwood, which is just like a little tiny cocktail bar. And there's this little dungeon downstairs that fits like 40 people or something.
Yeah.
And I remember they were doing a spot and talking about um ADHD. And I was like, oh, okay. Because people like women didn't have ADHD back then. I mean, they did, but like I just
You.
never heard. I don't like. I don't think I'd ever heard a a woman like talk about that before. And yeah, I think there was a few things happening at once, but I think it's so different when you hear someone talking about their experience rather than diagnostic criteria.
Yes.
And it just makes you go, oh my God, like it's just such a crazy feeling when someone's explaining the thing that you've always felt for your whole life that you didn't understand, and you just know, you just like realize in that moment. So yeah. Um yeah, and then I ended up getting diagnosed, and um then it was around like I'd been doing comedy for a couple of years at that point, so which is, building towards the first solo show. And it was just so absurd, all the hurdles that you had to jump through to get diagnosed, which is just so ironic and silly that ADHD people are expected to do that. It's like calling people, like trying to, there's just so many roadblocks, even for a regular person. It's just so silly. And then it's like trying to find an appointment, a referral, you have to do all these tests and like fill out all this paperwork, remember to bring it in the next time.
Has
Yeah,
that
so
changed now? Do you know? Is it easier now?
they are changing. Yes and no. Like they have made some changes to the way that diagnosis is treated, but I think, I mean, you still need to go and see a psychiatrist, which you should, but I think it's just the awareness. Like everybody knows that it's hard and weird. So, like so many people have been diagnosed in the last few years. You just go, oh, I'll ask my friend Mary. She
Yeah.
got diagnosed. Or I'll go on that Facebook group, or I'll go on Reddit,
Yeah.
or, I'll read one of the many articles. Like there's been so many things written about it. So the struggle, there was a huge backlog for quite a while of you just couldn't get an appointment to see a psychiatrist. And then like a lot of dodgy telehealth clinics have popped up, and there's like really no ceiling on how much you can charge people to
Right.
see a private psychiatrist, which is like ridiculous. It's
Mm.
so ridiculous. Yeah, so I've heard of people paying $3,000 for
Wow.
one appointment. Yeah.
So, how insightful of that friend of yours in your early 20s when really there was no, I mean, we didn't talk about ADHD and we didn't talk about ADHD in women at all. What was it, do you think? Like, talk through that
This
period.
is a bit naughty. This is a bit naughty, but
Okay,
you asked the question.
I
O-
did.
Okay, so it was like, just say I'm 22, okay? It was a long time ago. I'm a big girl now. I've changed. Just say we went to music festivals and we imbibed of
Certain
things.
things. Yeah.
And it was that I would get tired and go to sleep when everybody else was staying up, and I'm a night owl. Like I can just stay up all night easy peasy. So that was the thing. She's like,
Wow.
I think that's what happens to people with ADHD. So that was the first thing. Bit of a salacious story, but yeah. So I was like, okay, interesting. And then every so often would try and do something about it and fail. But I also just like wasn't seeing any stories of people.
No.
I wasn't like convinced about it. And it wasn't like it was a dialogue that was happening anywhere or in the media. It wasn't like I was getting encouraged or pushed, like, oh, this is what you do when lots of women have it and don't know. So yeah, it was a very slow process, but I think the push was getting validated.
The path to comedy. I want to know about the path to comedy because, I mean, my perspective of that is what an incredibly brave thing to do. Tell me about the path to comedy. And is it brave? How do you feel before you get on stage?
It is brave. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm always like, oh, it's like whatever, but it is
It's
brave.
brave.
I'm just so used to being in a um anxiety adrenaline state that it's like normal for me.
Mm.
But it's also like I cannot emphasize enough how many comedians have ADHD and autistic as well. Like neurodiversity is like so insanely represented in comedy. It's crazy. And like with those two different things, like probably for different reasons. Although there is like a really big crossover where people with autism, it's something like 50% have ADHD as well. Um, yeah, but because there's like this, you get a real big dopamine hit from
Yeah.
it because of all the adrenaline and the anxiety and the nerves. So it was doing my first gig was so scary. Like, I mean, I just remember being backstage beforehand going like, what am I doing? Like, it's just, it felt like voluntarily just like chopping my own arm off or something. I'm like, this is insane. Why? This is so dumb. Why am I doing this? This is crazy. But like, yeah, I just remember getting up on that stage and saying my stuff, and I was like, this is the best feeling in the world. And when I got off, it was like I was just, yeah, there was just so much adrenaline, and I was just like, it was such a rush.
On
I
fire.
really wish I could get that back, that feeling that I had from like that first gig and the earlier gigs. Then you just get used to it. Or it's
Yeah.
like after you've been doing it for a while, it's not like, oh, you're good for someone who's new. It's like now I'm just like a professional comedian who needs to do a good job, you know? And
The
you're
bar
like, oh,
keeps
that,
lifting.
yeah, the bar keeps getting higher. So it's like, yeah, they laughed at those bits, but that bit was like, I'll leave a gig and be like, I'll be that one bit that people didn't laugh at as much
Yes.
as they did at the last gig. And I'm like, oh, so yeah,
So
that
there's
is,
still a bit of a perfectionist in there somewhere as well, then, huh?
yeah, perfectionism's like very common. I've probably learnt this during the podcast series. It's just super common
Yeah.
for people with ADHD, but I think especially women,
Mm.
because we have different expectations on us. We don't get the leeway of mucking around at school and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
So we're supposed to be good all the time and do our homework and whatever. Boys are kind of allowed to just fuck up a bit when they're younger, I think. And then when you like, and often women have to perform to a higher standard in the corporate world. So there's probably, if you get diagnosed later, there's probably been some significant like failures, like theoretically, some, just shitty things that have happened with work or whatever. So then you're very like, I have to do, especially once you get diagnosed, you're like, cool, now I've got medication. I see my psychologist. I know about ADHD. Now there's no excuses. I have to perform
Oh, the
at a,
pressure.
yeah, I know. It's like I'm realizing, and I think pretty much like around the time I got diagnosed, I was like, oh, so like having a psychologist, going to a therapist, that's just something I will do for the rest of my life. Like that's just something that I need. People with ADHD just need. It's not like I'm having a bit of a weird time at the moment.
Yeah.
It's just like we need that ongoing.
Just
Yeah.
to maintain.
Yeah, just to maintain, and you just sort of don't know what will stress you out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just get quite stressed, and sometimes if you're holding it in, it can really like snowball, and sometimes you just talk it out, and even just saying it out loud. I'm the easiest like client for a therapist. I love my therapist. I've been with her for like 8 years, but she's like, "Hey, how's it going?" Whereas I'm like, "Oh, things are hard because this and that and work and blah." And I did this gig, and well, actually, I guess when I think about it, the reason why that didn't go well was because it's new material, and it's like it's not. And she's like sitting there. I'm like, "Yeah, so I guess I need to be a bit more easy on myself." And you know what I mean? But
Job done.
yeah, exactly. She's like, "Tick." Nah, she's really good.
Yeah.